Welcome back from the break. I hope you guys are enjoying the program so far. My name is Jay Spikes, and I am so excited to introduce our keynote today. Let me tell you all about her. Elle Michelle Smith is the award-winning, best-selling author of several books, including her debut, No Thanks, 7 Ways to Say, I'll Just Include Myself. She is an ICF certified executive and personal coach, speaker, and CEO founder of No Silos Communications, LLC, a media and consulting company. It blends leadership development and strategic communications to empower high-performing Fortune 100 executives, especially women, with C-suite and senior executive leadership aspirations. She has more than 25 years of experience as an elite award-winning communicator for major corporations. She is also the creator, executive producer, and host of the Culture Soup podcast, which is now heard in more than 70 countries on nearly every continent. She's been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, Black Enterprise, ABC, NBC, and more. She is one of the most sought after contemporary speakers on topics surrounding technology, business, and culture on the most prestigious global, national, and regional stages. And now I'd like to welcome Miss Elle Michelle Smith.
Thank you so much, Jay. You know what? The year was 2015, and I had just about lost all of my baby weight. I was catching my stride, and I was doing really good work at the company, so much so that some of the officers were taking notice. One day when I was sitting in my cube, an officer passed by and said, "You know what? You're doing really good work, but I need you to come by my office." And I said, "Well, sure. When would you like for me to come?" He said, "Just get with my admin and let's see what we can do." I said, "Okay, cool." I thought I had a new client. So I did. I got on his books, and a few weeks later, I showed up in his office with my pen and paper, and I said, "How can I help you?" And he said to me, "No, how can I help you?" And I was stunned. Here I was on the 37th floor of a skyscraper in the middle of Dallas, Fort Worth, and I'm overlooking all of God's city. And then I'm thinking to myself, this man actually wants to help me. I was stunned. So I asked him, I said, "Well, you know what? I think maybe perhaps you could be a mentor. Do you have a mentoring circle?" And he said, "As a matter of fact, I do, but it's coming to a close. I tell you what I'll do. When you leave here, talk to my admin and see if you can book 30 minutes a month. And you just come by and you talk about anything you'd like." And, I recalled what some mentors had told me in the past. And they told me whenever I had an audience with an officer like that to always have an ask. I was glad I had something back pocket. But before I left, he asked me the most curious question. He said, "But Elle Michelle, why are you here?" And it was awkward. I didn't know what he meant by that. And it must have shown in my face because he said, "Don't get mad at me. I just want to know, why are you here?" So I started to tell him, well, my former boss at another agency was embedded here, and he gave me a call, and he stopped me and he said, "I'm not talking about that. I'm asking you, why are you here?" What I didn't know that he was asking me was, what is your value and what do you bring to this company? He said, "Well, you know what? We'll continue talking. Just go on and get in my books." And I did. For the next several years, I would see this officer once a month for 30 minutes to talk about my leadership trajectory. I did not know at that point that he was asking me about my value. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to talk about what it is to have your value and know your value and be able to articulate it, bet on yourself, as well as be your best advocate. Okay. Make sure that we're doing this right here. All righty. The hero in the book, No Thanks, 7 Ways to Say, I'll Just Include Myself, is value. It may come as a shock to you. It's not me. Although most of the book is about my story, at least part of the story, and the story of other women who happen to be my sponsors and mentors who have made it to the C-suite. But the heroine in the book is your value. And there's a reason for that. Knowing your value is key to your trajectory in life and in business. And when we talk about value, we have to know exactly what that means. Many people believe that it only means your market value. And while that's important, it's not the only aspect of your value. The value I'm speaking of is your intrinsic value. And that means it comes from deep within, and it's very much a part of your fiber. It's what you were born with, and it is also an indication that you were fearfully and wonderfully made. Once you understand that, the rest of your value adds on, and you should be able to communicate that in order for people to act on your behalf, or so that you can articulate to people who don't know. If you don't know your value, you're prone to have other people deem your value for you. And what can happen then? You're just wafting in the wind, going as people want you to go, coming as people want you to come. Sometimes our value, we believe, is found in our name, our culture, where we come from, but it's much deeper than that. We're really talking about your purpose and what is actually found in the values that you lean into and you find very important to who you are. It's also found in your story. Now, this is the important work of getting to know yourself. And as we talk about women of color attempting to be authentic in the workplace and coming into that conflict and seeing where your authenticity comes into conflict with how some spaces can other us, it's important to know who you are, because if you don't know who you are, you can't be authentic. Who are you actually? And that means that you need to look into every aspect of your story, going back as far as you can. Now, when I do that, I see themes of culture and my love for it. You know, it made sense that I was working at this company where you are today in the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because culture was very much something that I was intrigued with. I've been a student of it for years. And not just about race, about all the different things that make your squad a squad. We're talking about faith. We're talking about sports. We're talking about music. All of these things have cultures, all the way down to your girl squad and what you do as rituals. I'm intrigued by that. And as I told my story and recounted my story, themes of that kept recurring. Then I saw themes of business. There were times that I started businesses that I didn't even monetize back after graduate school. And then fast forward, I ran an agency for about a decade, a public relations agency. I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And then fast forward to now, I'm running one again. So as a serial entrepreneur, that made sense to me, but I love the corporate environment too. The other theme that came out during my storytelling was that I actually love technology. At the ripe age of 8 years old, my dad taught me how to, well, we called it programming back then. You guys may call it coding, but it's the same thing. Telling a computer what to do, right? With code and language. I learned how to do that back then, and even learned how to solve the Rubik's Cube when I was 12. Technology has always played a part in my story. It brings me to an anecdote of when I met a woman at a leadership conference that the same officer sent me to as a result of me asking for mentorship. And what I learned from her was this. She forced us to start to think about our 10 most significant moments in our lives, both personal and professional. Listen, my sister, there's no difference between the two. As much as we're told we need to live a personal life and a professional life, and I'm not talking about giving away the farm, I'm talking about understanding that you're the same person, whether you're at work or whether you're at home. And this pandemic has shown us that we very much are the same person because we've had to converge both life and business under one roof as we work remotely. And we had online school. For those of you with kids, you had to do it all in one place. During this time of thinking of your 10 most significant moments, you look at your highs and your lows. Whether it was those things that were very, very challenging to you, and you hate to talk about them because they make you cry, they make you sad, you've got to embrace the good and the bad, because from that story comes your leadership platform. What were the lessons that you learned between the ebbs and the tides? Those are the things that will supply you with the story that will allow you to know who you are. When I met this woman, Trudy Bourgeois, you probably know her too. She's one of my mentor coaches. She challenged me in front of a group of 200 women of color from all over the United States and even outside of the United States. They were all Fortune 500 executive women. And she asked me, what is it that you want to do? Now, at this point, I had more than 20 years of experience. And I did not know how to answer her, even though someone had told me what they thought I should be doing. And it was a pretty good thing. I realized deep down in myself, I did not know what I wanted to do. I needed to get clarity around those things. And I would start to get that in the next several months and years to come. Now, if you're reading No Thanks, or if you're about to read No Thanks, you'll want to know who the villain is in the book. While we talk about women of color not being centered, and we talk about microaggressions and how to deal with white privilege, we also talk about all sorts of other privilege. The villain in the book is actually fear. And fear comes to bear, one, when we don't know our value, but also when other people have tried to tell us our value and who we should be, or we're trying to mimic other people. When we come into situations and we need to be brave and courageous, fear bubbles up. Now the question becomes, what do you do in the midst of fear? What do you do with that fear? I'll tell you a secret. There's no such word as fearless. You may know the word, but is it really, really real? Let's look at the definition of courage or bravery. Courage and bravery only exist in the midst of fear. So it only means for us that we need to push through it, okay? So there are those things that are actually scary. Innovation, trying something new, getting in the face of change, whether we instigate it or something else instigates it. Maybe we're fearful because we know that something has happened that is really, really real. Maybe it is that microaggression. Maybe it is that mansplaining that happened in that meeting. Maybe it is some political garbage and toxicity that happened. That's a real reason to be fearful, but it's not a reason to stop. You'll find that fear is usually one of the number one ways that we get stuck. And I have to ask you right now, sis, how are you feeling in your career and personal journey right now? Are you content? Are you happy? That's where we want to get. Are you complacent? Are you just satisfied? Because that check comes and it's pretty nice. And you got your stock over here and things are working out well. You're getting your increase every year. But I'm going to encourage you, my sister, to dream. And so many of us have forgotten how to do it because we've just been grinding. I've got to ask you today, what do you really want? I had to do some of that soul searching myself. And it came at a time where I got something that most people would be afraid of. It was a surplus notice. That can evoke fear. But in my situation, it didn't. It actually opened up some opportunities. You know, back when I was at AT&T, a surplus notice looked like a very humane way to do a layoff. You had about 60 days to figure out if you wanted to stay and look for a job. But I was very, very fortunate, very, very blessed to have leaned outside of the organization to build my tribe and also have other opportunities. I also was able to lean into the organization because leaders there wanted me to stay. And they said, just give us the word. I created some opportunities. And that's what you need to do in this new digital fractured economy. It's very important that you lean out in order to lean in, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. Let's ask about your value. Do you know what your value is? Okay, so your market value is pretty easy. It's a numeric thing. You can go out, you can check Glassdoor, you can check LinkedIn, you can see what comparable positions make like yours. You could even go interview and find out what someone's willing to offer you. But I'm talking about your intrinsic value. My sister, I am challenging you to go through an exercise to understand who you are, the good, the bad, and the otherwise, and start to understand what you bring to the table and how you can articulate it. Knowing your value is critical to knowing and being able to bet on yourself. You know, people throw these terms around, bet on yourself, get a tribe, get a personal board of directors. But who's really telling us what that all means? Betting on yourself isn't just about having confidence. Yes, that's part of it. But sometimes it really is about making sure that you understand that you can survive no matter what comes your way. It's also about knowing your value proposition. And we'll get to that when we get to knowing how to advocate for yourself. But once you have these key components in line, you can make risky. I know we don't like the word. You can run to the risk as a transformational leader. So here I am sitting in the officer's beautiful office. This is another officer. And he's saying, well, are you going to stay? If you want to, just let us know. And I said, you know what? I respect that. In fact, I'm going to listen to everything that you guys have to put in front of me. But in the meantime, I was reminded. I made a list of 6 things when I was in graduate school. And there were things that I wanted to do in my life, but I just didn't have the connections, the credibility, the credentials, all the things you need to make them happen. And it occurred to me that I had already ticked off 4 of them. I only had 2 more to go. And he looked at me and he said, so you're going to leave? And I said, yeah, I think I am, because I owe it to myself to see what I can do with these other 2 things. I was doing them. I had already started the book. I was getting on planes and going to visit publishers and talk to them about the book and getting it published. I'd already started a consultancy, and that consultancy was around leadership and mentoring. It was the beginning of the coaching practice that I have today. And I was able to bet on myself in a way that really shook some people, because when I left AT&T, I did not have what most people would say, you know, you need to have that other job. But when you know your value and what you bring to the table, and you are working in a way that is excellent, and you have created buzz about yourself where the opportunities begin to chase you, you don't worry about a job on the other end. You may be asking, how does this apply to me? I don't plan on leaving. The point is that leaning out allows you to bring the value right back inside. Now, so many of us, and I have clients to do this too, across all sorts of industries, they have been in the bubble so long that they don't know their value. So I encourage you to lean out, upskill, find out what you need to know, and get up on what's happening in your industry or even other industries. Bring that right back inside of this company. The next thing you want to do is diversify your income. What better way than to have a stash of cash and be able to walk into rooms where you know it's thick, sis. You know, there are people in there that don't necessarily even like you. And they may even call you angry or hard to work with, but you can still say what needs to be said because you know there's money in the bank. You also know there are opportunities. You want to be able to walk tall in your power. And that's the number one way to bet on yourself. Now, betting on yourself takes bravery. And this is going to get into being your own best advocate too, because allowing yourself to prioritize yourself. We talk about personal brands. We talk about the branding and we talk about shining and all of this good stuff. It's actually counter traditional corporate culture. Okay. Let's be real about this. Corporate actually means one body. And it's really around the idea of assimilating. So now we're talking about you being a double disadvantaged, double outsider. Okay. You're a woman and you're of color. We're already othered. And now we're talking about shining. We already stick out. So look, many of us have spent our time trying to dumb it down, trying to shrink. To be an excellent leader, you have to be unapologetically yourself, and you have to shine despite it all. It takes bravery, and know that not everybody's going to like when you start to shine. But you know what? It's okay. Being your own best advocate means prioritizing you. Now, this is more than about self-care. It is about mind, body, and soul, but it's also about prioritizing your career over any company. Now, that may sound like, oh my, that sounds very disloyal. But let me tell you something. When you actually put your mask on first, everybody around you not only survives, but they thrive, including your company. So if you are becoming that thought leader that you should become, it not only makes you look good, it makes the company look good. There's research that shows it. The other thing that you need to think about is, sis, we're always doing all the things. We're doing way more because our parents have told us you got to be twice, 3 times, 10 times as good to be in the room, to be at the table. But are they really paying you to do all that? I'm going to ask you very carefully. If you are a high-performing woman of color, it's why you're even in this program. The company has acknowledged this. Know that your 100%, your 80% is twice as good as your colleagues. So what does that tell you when it comes to the math? Let's scale down on the 150%, the 200%, because sis, you're just wearing yourself down. That's a great way to be your own advocate. Another way to be your own advocate is to have and assemble and activate your own tribe. You can't do it by yourself. And there were times when I couldn't go to my boss, although I had an excellent boss at some point. I couldn't always go to him. I needed a sponsor who would slam his fist on a table or her and look around corners I couldn't see and advocate for me. I needed a mentor who would pour into me like that officer on the 37th floor. I needed peers that I could turn to who knew things that I didn't know, who could see around other corners that I couldn't see, but also the kind of informants. They knew what was going on in other rooms. I needed people more junior than me that knew more than I did in certain areas. And I needed all of these people to be diverse, not just at my company, but at other companies and other industries too. Again, you're leaning out in order to lean in. Build your tribe inside and outside of your company. And also know that it's so important that you bring everything that you learn back to your company. It's going to allow you to shine. And whatever they see that's going on outside of the company, it should be a reflection of this experience that you want people to have with you. Now that gets to the word brand. A lot of people don't know what the word brand means unless you've been in marketing. I'm here to give you a straight up, diehard definition, okay? Listen, it is the experience that people have with you, okay? When you think about Nordstrom's, it's great customer service. What do you want people to feel when they come in contact with you? And I'm here to, debunk some myths. It's not social media. Social media is an amplifier. You should be amplifying the brand that you build. In other words, the experience that people have with you. But ask the question, What experience do you want people to have with you? And then be intentional about executing that every day. There's your brand, there's your reputation. Your reputation is something that people say about you when you're not in the rooms. Your brand can absolutely impact the reputation. You can't necessarily control the reputation. So it's very important to build that experience. Ask yourself, what do you want people to feel? Now, let's get to the value proposition. What one problem do you solve? This isn't your title. This isn't even, multiple titles. It is the statement that says what you do, how you solve it for the people you actually solve it for. I empower women and women of color to be rock star leaders and get to the C-suite through writing, speaking, and executive coaching. What I've named for you is not only who I do it for, my superpowers, and I also named my passion. You're going to need all three of those to get to your value proposition. And if you're reading the book, there's a formula there for you in order to start to develop it. You must lean out in order to lean in. Sis, I can't stress this more than enough. If you exist in the bubble, you will stay in the bubble until change happens and then you feel out of control. This is all about remaining to some degree in some form of control over your destiny because you are being intentional about it. Here are a few things that I want you to take away. And as you're reading the book, take notes and also answer the coaching questions. You need to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And that doesn't mean that you have to go out and start a business. It means that you need to be building business inside of your organization as an entrepreneur, but also building outside of your organization. And that doesn't mean, again, starting a small business, even if that means investing, even if it means, looking into real estate, something that will help you to have that extra stream of income so that you have more confidence walking into the building or even in your remote working environments. You want to be a transformational leader, and that's what that entrepreneurial mindset is all about. You need to be willing to run to the risk. Sis, if you are just doing your job description, and yeah, you may be slaying it every day, but you aren't solving problems and thinking ahead of your leaders, that's not how you get promoted. That's not how you make it to the C-suite. You have got to make a risk, and you have to run to it, okay? Allow yourself to dream. We've forgotten how to do this. We have to be able to carve out the time to say, what is it that I really want? And then visualize it and say how you feel and be very detailed about that. And then start mapping a plan to make it happen. Double down on your positive self-talk. The book is built on the chassis of positive psychology. There are 7 positive affirmations that will help you through all of this. We covered 3 of them today. Change is inevitable, but what will you do to instigate it before it comes for you? So important. And then here's one that I want you to think about. Do you, not her. It's very, 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 it's very tempting to look at someone else and say, I love what she's doing. I want to do that. But sis, if you don't do the work, knowing yourself, knowing your story, and understanding there are keys to your future in your past, you're going to be mimicking someone else and you're not going to get the same returns, and it's definitely not going to be sustainable. You have to do you, okay? And finally, upskill, have an alternative stream of income, build community inside and outside of your company. And when I say community, that's one step above your network. Your network is that bunch of people that you're connected with, but you really don't know. That community, they're people who know you, you know them, they'll do something for you, and you'll do something for them. And then up a little bit higher than that is that tribe. And I've named who's in that tribe: sponsors, mentors, peers, juniors. And they're not just in your company, they're outside of that company. Now, here's the key to activating them. Let them know what you want to do. Give them your value proposition. Tell them what problem you're trying to solve, and watch them jump into action. If you'd like to stay in touch with me, I will give you my contact information, but in the meantime, Jay, I'll turn it back to you for Q&A.
Wow. I was sitting here. I don't even know, probably about 3 or 4 pages of notes. I felt like you were talking directly to me. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to remind everybody that you can submit, thank you, and ask questions through the Inquire app. And so go ahead and submit your questions so that, okay, we got some more coming in. Here's the first one, Elle Michelle. In your book, you mentioned how some women of color share parts of themselves over time. We keep hearing, be you, your authentic self. How much of ourselves should we actually bring to the table? That's a very good question.
It is a very good question. Now, for some of you who are deep into the book, there's a chapter on authenticity. And not only do I share my point of view on it, but I also share the point of views of 3, 4 other ladies. And one of the things that's common in the themes is that you need to be able to dial it up and dial it down, but always, always be yourself, okay? We're moving away from code switching. We have graduated from that. Code switching, of course, is turning off, maybe even covering who you really are and being something else in order to get along. We're recommending that you style flex, and that's what Trudy calls it, style flexing. And it's about volume, okay? You need to be able to, read the room, use your EQ. If you go into a room or a space where they don't know your work, they don't know how excellent they are, you need to dole it out in small amounts. So dial it up a little bit, not very much. Once they get to know you, however, and they know the work that you do, and you have cleared the hurdle of competency, you're getting exceeds ratings over and over and over again, okay? Do you? Some people would ask me because they'd see me in the hallways, they'd see me on the platform with this wild curly fro when I was working at the company. They're like, oh my gosh, like, is that your brand? Well, first of all, it wasn't my brand, it was my hairdo, but it was an expression of my brand. And, you know, being fashion forward and also very cultural is a part of my experience and the experience I want people to share. But I only did that in my career knowing full well what I was bringing to the table, and that was sheer excellence. And if somebody didn't like it, it was okay. I'd go to another place that did. You have to be certain of yourself, but you also have to understand that the people in the room or the space deserve to have all of you, or they may not deserve to have all of you. It's not just a one-way street. It's not just them judging you. You also need to ask yourself, do they really deserve to have all of my authentic self? So a few different things. Style flexing, dial it up, dial it down, okay? Based on excellence for performative performative excellence is your ticket to the authenticity party, okay? Can't be authentic until that happens. But once it does, based on who's in the room, how you respect them, if you respect the company or even the work you're doing, dial it all the way up if you think they're deserving. I hope that helps.
That was excellent. That was excellent. We have another question that came in. What was your fear when you left your company?
I got to tell you, I really didn't have any fears at that point. I'd run a business before. I've been other places before. I made VP before I was 30. This again gets back to the idea of understanding without any doubt what your value is. That means that you're going to know that someone's going to recognize it. And one of the things that officer challenged me to do was to go out and find my market value. And he said, I want to be clear, I'm not telling you to leave. And that's very important for you to know. Just because you go out and interview and find out what someone is willing to pay you does not mean that you're ready to leave the company. It means that you're finding out what your monetary value, your market value is. Do you know what that does to the pep in your step when you go back to your company? I already knew that. I'd already gone through that exercise 2 years before. So I knew what I was worth. I knew my intrinsic value. I knew that I'd run businesses before. If I wanted to run my own business, I'd already started it while I was there at AT&T. If I wanted to continue it, I knew that I could. What was I afraid of? Wow. I don't really think that I was afraid. And that's 25 years at that point, year over year of learning, sitting in, I say, finding the message in the mess when you go through things, and really understanding what I brought to the table and knowing that I was going to be okay. That's what I want for you, my sisters.
That's great. Thank you. So we have a couple of comments that I will read to you. Michelle is a great speaker. And while I don't have any questions, I have enjoyed listening to her. And someone else says, yes, powerful and honest talk. Another person says, no thanks, your book really spoke to me. Thank you for sharing your experiences and giving us great strategies and affirmations.
You are very welcome. Thanks for reading the book.
Yeah. So while we don't have any questions yet, new ones coming in, I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit on when you talked about we're doing all the things, right? And because we are, that's my area, right? So because we are high performers, you said your 80% is probably twice as good as someone else's 100%. So talk a little bit more about that scaling back, because I think that tends to, for a lot of us, resonate, and we have that fear of doing that, but then there's the burnout, right? So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. As you begin to progress and go higher in your career and your company, you're going to experience even more demands. And most of that demand is going to be a little bit more obtuse and not necessarily on the execution. But what I've found across all of my clients, and even in speaking to people across the country, that so many women of color are they're so used to being the executor that they don't really know how to let that go and start to delegate more and trusting their team members to handle things. One way that they do this, and it really seems to create burnout, is not being in control of their time, okay? What I hear from the women that I coach, and even the men, boy, if I just had some time, to sit and think about these things, but I got meeting after meeting after meeting on my calendar. And I ask them, who controls that? Who's in control of your time? And then they say, oh, well, that's me. So I give them this paradigm, okay? You need to be able to think about the important over the urgent. What's urgent and what's important, first of all, okay? Urgent isn't always important, and urgent isn't always urgent to you. If it's important, that means it's important to the business, it's important to your boss, it's important to you and your trajectory. That should stay on your calendar. Everything else might need to be delegated, backburnered, or deleted. You can apply the same paradigm to your emails. And guess how much time you get back? Try it and see how it goes. Now, the other piece of it is this. If you still have your hands in the execution pot and you're a director and above, I'm going to challenge you to start to let go. And I know it seems because they've come to expect it. You've trained them this way. You need to start training people not to expect execution from you, but more strategy and more consultative work. Now, for those of you who aren't director and above, I need you to start thinking this way, okay? Some of you actually aren't individual contributors. You have teams. How can you start to walk like a director? And that's the way you're going to get promoted. When people start to see you and say, oh my gosh, I saw your title, but I thought you were a director. You walk and talk and you move like one. Start to aim for that next position. And part of that is letting go. And sis, I know it's hard, but you got to do it.
So good. So good. Thank you for that. We have another question. How do you align your market value to your monetary value? Or how do you make sure it's translated to monetary value?
Okay, well, your market value is related to your monetary value. It should be all one thing, unless you have another definition that I'm not aware of for monetary value. And listen, depending on your level, depending on how you're compensated, especially if you've been with the company for a while, You may not know how that translates outside of the organization. Quick ways to look, of course, you can look at the websites like LinkedIn, like Glassdoor, but the real way to find out is to talk to somebody about it. And if you're still kind of skittish about interviewing because you're not trying to leave, have some conversations with people outside of your company, people who have the title that you're looking for, and find out what they're making. And especially if they haven't been with that company for a while, chances are they got the market value at that point in time that they were hired. You want to find somebody close to about the same time frame as you're looking for, but I'm going to tell you, sis, one of the easiest ways to do it is just jump, go out there, interview. I found out that I could double my bring home just at the same level when I was looking at my market value. When you find that out, you not only get to come back and walk tall, but the next position that you take, you're able to be knowledgeable about what you're actually worth. And then talk to HR, talk to your bosses, and see if you can get that adjustment.
Excellent, excellent. So another couple of comments in here. No thanks, your book really spoke to me. Thank you for sharing your experiences and giving us great strategies and affirmations. And another person says, and this is really good, I've already started posting notes around my house. Not only is it helpful to me, it's had a powerful impact on my daughter as well. The whole environment feels better when we feel better about ourselves. Thank you for the affirmations and the confidence.
Wonderful. You know what? I want to mention, ladies, you got to double down on the positive self-talk. Even when you go into rooms where no one overtly says something negative to you, just know that because of the way systems are built, there is intrinsic negativity that seeps into our pores simply because we are the double outsider. And that may seem, I don't know, unreal, but so many of us are claiming imposter syndrome when culturally, all of us have been taught, you can do it. You can do all things. You can go in there and be twice as good as anybody. In fact, you better be. And then we come out of the space feeling some kind of way. My sister, that's not imposter syndrome. That's the environment that is okay with microaggressive behaviors. That's the environment that says, you know what, I was guessing that he was in charge and not her. They don't expect you to lead. And sometimes that stuff is just so ingrained and just insidious in the spaces where we are. So we must double down on the positive self-talk, not just to ourselves, but building that tribe that will pour that right back into you and tell you the truth, that you are amazing, that you can do amazing things, and that you are worth so much more than even you know. So before you start to say, oh, I have, you may have imposter syndrome, but it's not always the case.
That is good. That is good. So I want to ask you, while we're waiting on more questions, so let's go back to the lean out to lean in. Oftentimes, so we have our blinders up, right? And we have them up with our jobs, and we also have them up with our corporations as well. And we're not looking outside, how you talked about. So again, just elaborate a little bit more on the importance of actually leaning out and interacting with and having exchanges and building relationships outside of your organization, utilizing resources such as LinkedIn to build new relationships.
It's so important. Listen, yeah, I like the way you said blinders. You can inadvertently have blinders on if you're not talking to people outside. You've got to talk to them. And sometimes that just means finding another woman at another organization or another man at another organization, maybe even in your same industry, and understanding what they're up against. Ask them how they've handled certain situations. It's only going to make you stronger. It should not scare you, because this is an exercise in confidence. That's what all of this is about. Being able to say, no, thanks, I will include myself, means that you have the confidence to walk in and out of spaces no matter what anyone is saying to you, and know your value and know that you will be okay, and run to the risk and be able to create opportunities and have opportunities chasing you. Upskilling is so important. Now, I talk about in the book, it's so important to know your rules around compliance. Okay. When I was at the company, it was very important, especially in my area, that I wasn't selling PR services externally. I didn't have any desire to do that anyway, but that would not be compliant. I was selling services around leadership. Okay. And so I was able to not just do that, but as I was building that enterprise, I was learning. I was learning things that I wasn't learning inside the company. And guess what I was doing? Bringing that knowledge right back into the company. It makes me even more valuable. At that point, people still didn't understand what this personal branding thing was about. But you know what? It was interesting because I was walking the walk, and I was bringing that back to the company so I could share it with the officers so they would know what to do when it came to, building their LinkedIn profile and actually understanding what engagement looked like and how that could benefit not just them, but the company. Do not be afraid to peek your head outside and see what's there that could benefit you and make you even more valuable where you stand. So again, we talked about other lines of income. That's a really good one right there. If you've got the money in your back pocket, it's not going to be scary to take a risk. Think about it. Most of the fears that we have come from, well, if I try this and it fails, what do I do? Well, innovation really is about trying and failing and learning. You've got to be willing to fail. And the only way you'll be willing to fail is if you have the confidence that you can not only learn, but get back up and do better.
So good. I'm so enjoying this conversation. So we got a really good one that came in, and it has to do with your daughter. How you mentioned work-life integration. How are you teaching your daughter how to say no thanks? So how can we incorporate that with our children?
It's interesting because Joni, that's her name for those of you that do not know, she's 9 years old right now. Much of what she learns from me, I do a lot of talking to her, and I'm making sure that she understands how to take the time to breathe and then also to use the affirmations. But I got to tell you a little story. Many times your kids are watching when you don't even realize they're watching, and they're soaking it in when you're not realizing they're soaking it in. 2020, it's July. And I am frantically working on the first version of the book. It's coming out in August. I'm going through my last iteration of edits, and she's supposed to be in online school upstairs. Now, she was 8 at the time. Look, some adults can't handle Zoom, let alone an 8-year-old in Zoom school to keep focused. Well, naturally, she ends up downstairs in my home studio. And she said, "Mommy, I want to write a book." And I said, "Joni, that's so sweet. That's really nice. That's a good thought. Maybe one day you will." She said, "Oh, no, Mommy. I think that I should write Little No Thanks or No Thanks for Girls." Stopped me in my tracks. She had been listening to me talk to editors, talk to my mom, talk to my sister, talk to clients, and all of these things. She'd been listening. And she said that I can write stories about how I can, withstand bullying or when someone doesn't treat me fairly, because I can say positive things too. She was just learning composition. She's in the 3rd grade. I sent her off with a grandmother, who's a retired English teacher, and said, "Write me 7 stories of your experiences at school and at home of how maybe you were scared, maybe you were mistreated, and how you got over it." She wrote those stories, brought them back to me. I hired a children's writer editor to put it in book format and an illustrator. And that's the book behind me, No Thanks for Girls, 7 Ways to Say I'm Beautiful, Strong, and Enough. So she uses the same positive psychology, she wouldn't call it that, to get her through situations. And of course, she has her faith to lean on because that's one of our values: faith, family, and freedom.
That is so beautiful. I'm going to get that book. I have, oh my goodness, 3 granddaughters. So I'll be getting that for the three of them because you can never start too early. I love that story. The next thing I want to ask you to elaborate on just a little bit, because this so resonated with me. I wrote it down. You said, do you, not her. Oh,
Amen.
That was so rich. So yes, amen. Absolutely. So can you just spend a few more moments elaborating on the importance for us to be ourselves?
Absolutely. Look, I had some amazing people in my book that are part of my life. I mean, y'all know St. Marshall, my goodness. But I can't set out to be St. Marshall, okay? I can't set out to be Cheryl Atkins Green, the CMO of Mary Kay. I could try, but let me tell you where I see this mostly, okay? You've all been there. You may even be guilty of it. I've seen it too, because the psychology of these social media platforms have FOMO built into them. How many of you are scrolling through Instagram, Facebook, and looking at somebody else's life and say, oh, she's a boss. You know, she's doing amazing things. I want to do it too. And before you know it, you're out there trying to do the same thing that sister's doing, but you don't know the story that brought her there. And you're wondering why it's taking a little bit to take off, why you're not making money at it, why you're getting tired, even though you might be making money at it, or it's a little successful. It's because it's not sustainable when it does not come from your values and your passions. And that requires that you get to know yourself. And so many of us haven't had the opportunity to stop and think about, who am I? What am I good at? What am I passionate about? And how do my values align with it? That's going to be your North Star for what you should do. So listen, I challenge you. What would it take for you to take 20 minutes a day? Clear your schedule to just think and visualize, what is it that I want? Sometimes we end up mimicking other people because we haven't been clear about what it is we actually want. We see somebody else living their life, but we haven't thought about what we want. So I challenge you, take that time, and that next 20 minutes that you take the next day, start thinking about, what will it take to actually do this thing? A lot of people are doing a lot of things. A lot of folks are out there writing books. A lot of people are starting podcasts. I mean, there are over 2 billion podcasts out there. When I started The Culture Soup, there were 500,000. Now there's 1 billion. Somebody said they started a podcast. I'm like, yeah, congratulations, you and everybody else. And I wonder, have they thought about what is your why? And it's important to do that before you dive into something. And it shouldn't be just because you saw somebody else do it, because sis, it's not sustainable.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. I'm going to ask you a couple more while we're waiting on more questions. This also resonated with me. I think it's really important, especially for high performers in the workplace and those who are seeking for promotion and stretching as far as their growth is concerned. You said, think ahead of your leaders. That's so important, right? So kind of elaborate again on the importance of what that really means, the practical piece of that, well, you already talked about the outcomes as far as wanting the promotion, right? But thinking ahead of your leaders is so important. So can you elaborate on that for us?
Absolutely. We're talking to the eagles, right? We're eagles all are gathered today. Okay, so eagles soar. Eagles have that vision because they can see, so many miles up, they fly pretty high. Eagles need to be able to see out front in order to lead. Now, you have leaders too, and that's great. They have their agendas, they have their purpose and their objectives and their goals. Make sure you understand what those are and how they play into the larger context of the company. It's very important for you to know. Until you understand that, it's hard to be able to connect the dots to what it is that you do every day. But once you do, you'll be able to say, this is what keeps my leader up at night. This is what keeps the business from toppling over. What will make my company money, or what will avert risk from losing money? Okay, those are 2 key questions right there. Think about those. Also understand how your role plays into the larger picture of the business. Once you have all of that in line, you can start to innovate. Now, this is the thing that gets people scary. They wonder, if I have an idea, okay, is it going to be half-baked? Sis, let's make sure it's not. But at the same time, make sure that it's digestible by these leaders who don't have very much time. When I went through this process and I introduced the idea of inclusion marketing there at AT&T, I understood that I needed to not just shop it around to my leaders, but there was my tribe. You got to have a tribe, okay? So Cint was in my tribe. She took a look. I had some other folks in my tribe. Corey was in my tribe. He took a look. There were other people in my tribe inside the company and outside the company. It wasn't until I got all of them to give me feedback and also bless it before I took it to my SVP, who, by the way, once we got in that room, we didn't get past slide number 2, which actually had a big chart on it that showed how we would make money or lose money. That he just stopped everything where it was. And he said, I'm going to have a meeting with my 2 VPs and we're going to put this into action. But I'm telling you, if you don't have the answers to those original questions, it's very hard to innovate. And you also have to be clear on the fact that if you're doing your job and you're doing your job excellently every day, that's not going to move you up the chain. It'll keep you right where you are. So it's good to be doing a great job at what you're doing, but you got to run to the risk. You got to innovate. You got to solve some problems. And that's going to make you bubble up into a realm that a lot of people think are a little elusive. Like, how are they having these meetings? How did she get a mandate from an SVP? Why are 80 people a part of this movement? So think about how you can solve some problems.
Excellent, excellent advice. Okay, so we have time for probably one more question, and it has to do with code switching. So how do you move, because you mentioned style flexing. I love that concept. So how do you move from code switching to style flexing?
Okay, first of all, sis, I need you just to stop with the code switching, because code switching at its very roots is covering, even if it's for a moment. It's like the difference between multitasking and task switching. One doesn't really exist. Multitasking doesn't really exist because your brain can only do one thing at a time. Code switching, you're covering, okay? Let's just call it what it is. I'm going to challenge you to stop, okay? If you find yourself in an environment that seems to like the person you have to become better than it likes you, and AT&T is a big company, find another place to work in the company, at the very least, because that's toxic, okay? We have gotten to a point as people of color that we really believe that this is necessary. And in some cases, you know, our parents may have felt like it had to be, but that was the generation of survival. We're in a generation of choice. And some of us are just getting to that point where we're just realizing we have some choices we can make because we're not fighting for access nearly as much as our previous generation was. We are, but not as much. And we have this thing called the internet. Now, when you start to understand that your value is also tied to the very authentic person that you bring to the table, and that your authentic self has something of value to share that is unique, that your extra is more important that you shine a light on than the ordinary. You know the word extraordinary? Your extra is more important than the ordinary, because when you start to rise in the ranks, you'll start to see that everybody's smart, you know? Everybody's good, but that rock star leader has an it factor. And that it factor is going to come from your authentic self. And I'm not just talking about hairdos. I'm not talking about nose rings, because I've had my nose ring since before I was promoted to director. I'm not talking about style. I'm talking about how you work, your work style. I'm talking about your management style. I'm talking about the way you speak and communicate. I'm talking about all of those things. I'm talking about the way you can innovate and bring the business to another level. Some of us have been taught to dim our shine. It's going to be hard to unlearn. But these affirmations that I've given to you, I'm going to give you another little tool to make it easier for your brain to accept the positive affirmation along with your heart. Now, the book is based in positive psychology. I'm going to give you some neuroscience now. My next books have neuroscience in them, including the journal that is the companion to the No Thanks book. You need to say, I am wonderful just the way I am, because now here comes the neuroscience, okay? The positive psychology says, give yourself that great compliment and say it over and over again. Neuroscience says, give your brain the proof. Because, and then I want you to cite something in the past where you were absolutely positively able to be all you and you killed that thing. I mean, you absolutely slayed it. Fill it in and use that affirmation and start talking to yourself every day. And that will bring you the confidence to be able to style flex. And you know what? You're new at it. So I'm going to tell you, start with the volume down, okay? Bring a little bit of yourself to the room. Don't dial it all the way up. Don't give them everything, okay? First of all, you don't know if they deserve it yet. But second of all, you don't want to overwhelm them. You need to get to know the room, get to know the space, use your EQ, but start with it dialed down. And then little by little, as you see that, hey, this is working, people like this, start to dial it up. But again, we don't cover because that's not authentic.
Thank you so much. This was so good. I want to thank you for sharing all with us how to say no thanks. I'll just include myself. And we are going to now take a quick commercial break. But Elle Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you. And I'll see you guys after the break.
Thank you so much for having me, Jay.